although I will argue that the Democrats have a very devious plan for 2024 that could have some success at the expense of the EU. Okay, what Joe Biden came in saying was, I'm going to bring jobs back. Basically, his argument is, I'm going to reindustrialize the United States. I'm going to bring jobs back. I'm going to bring industry back. And everyone said, well, you can't do that. You know, a lot of people looked at it and we said, well, you can't do that because it would have to come back from China and we can't compete labor wise, right? Well, if you're a neocon and you're thinking, I need to bring industry back here so I can compete with China. What if they are actually recognizing that a financialized industry can't compete? We do have some commodities. We have oil and gas, so we have commodities, right? But they're recognizing that this financialized, they're not stupid. This financialized economy can't compete with the industrialized economy and the commodity economy of Russia. You've got to reindustrialize. So what do? You got to get that industry from somewhere. You take it from the EU. So what do? You turn off the gas to the EU so that their industry can no longer afford. See, you can't keep in mind, where does capital flow to? Where does industry go to? What happened in the US? US industry looked at China and said, labor and cost are cheaper. I'm picking up out of here and I'm going to China. And they already know that. So you want to reindustrialize here so you can compete with China. There's no other way. So you say, well, we've got to make it cheaper here. In fact, the Europeans are some of them are starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, what is this Inflation Reduction Act? This is part of that plan. So what they do is you cut off the economic model, which is cheap energy from Russia, for the EU. The EU deindustrializes. You do this Inflation Reduction Act. You set up an environment where it's very welcoming for industry. You steal all the industry from the EU. You reindustrialize. You bring the jobs back. You certainly, from the perspective of the neocons, the EU is disposable in the same way that Ukraine is disposable. Now, going into 2024, you say, look at all these jobs I brought back. Things are looking good. People are expecting that the EU's economy will die and ours will. What if ours won't? What if we just reindustrialize from the EU, reinflate our economy gets stronger, the EU is disposable, you throw that empty husk of what once was a great society aside, and boom, you're ready to go and your economy is strong again. And now they're ready to economically be in a position to compete with China at the expense of the EU industry.
It's extraordinary because it's a predatory approach to your own allies. I mean, you feed on them. I could still remember the time when the United States was coming into Europe, giving money to Europe, building up Europe, because of course that was its geostrategic interest at that time. And this was true in Greece, but it was much more true in Germany and all across Europe with Marshall Aid and all those sort of things. And that legacy was still very strong. That the memory of all of that was still very vivid in the 1960s. And now the United States is doing the reverse. It's now feeding on its allies. I wonder how long, given that is so, they can realistically remain allies.
Well, as long as it takes, I'll put it like this, of all the old fables of fattening the goose for the holidays, right? Well, they only need to continue to fatten the goose until the holidays get here, and then it's time to eat. And after that, you throw the bones aside, you're done with it. They kept Europe strong and they kept their economy go strong as long as that benefited them. Now they need economy. They just grab it and they take it home because times are getting difficult. Before, they could prey on the resources of the global South. They could go to Africa. They could go to Russia. They could go to South America. Well, now they have competition there. Russia and China are going there, and Russia and China are not so much preying on those areas of the world as they are doing business with them. So a predatory system, the predator has run out of rabbits. Now it's time to eat deer. Deer's bigger than a rabbit, but when you get hungry, you got to eat something. And so they fattened them up. And now, unfortunately for the EU, It's time for the US to reindustrialize at the expense of the EU. And here's the other thing I think that is important. The leaders of the EU, they are not innocent bystanders here. The leaders of the EU are not stupid. The leaders of the EU, while the people of the EU felt that they had independence and sovereignty, the leaders of the EU always knew they didn't. And in fact, their jobs were to maintain the illusion of independence and sovereignty while they reported to their bosses in Washington, D.C. And now their jobs are to hold off the people as long as they can. When it's all said and done, I always say, if you want to know how this thing ends up, just look at Afghanistan. In the end of these operations, some guys get jumping on a plane with suitcases full of money, and they're falling out of the back. These guys all expect to end up in some gated neighborhood just south of Miami, and they'll leave Europe behind. And of course, what's going to happen in Europe? What always happens, what happened in Iraq, what happened in Afghanistan. First, the very wealthy leave. Then those who are doctors or lawyers or who have marketable skills, they go to another country where they can make a good living with those skills. And what you end up left with in Europe is a working class with no work and very, very angry people. And at that point, they've been discarded anyway. Yeah. The wealthy class has removed themselves to Turkey. It's cheap to live in Turkey, and they seem like they're smart enough to make a deal with Russia. And the other countries, the Saudi Arabias, the Turkeys of the world, they understand this dynamic. That's why they're shifting away, because they already know with the EU, right, with the US right now, it's either be eaten or get out of the flock. And they are making a run for it.